there was a leak a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago or so, where Maduro's private pilot said that the CIA had approached him and tried to recruit him so that when Maduro eventually fled, rather than land the plane in Havana, he would land it in Key West, and we could grab Maduro and put him on trial for narcotics trafficking. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. My guess is the president is trying to put as much pressure as possible on Maduro, political pressure on Maduro, to leave, knowing that thousands and thousands of Venezuelans who are in the diaspora would return to Venezuela to help rebuild their country. And at the same time, you keep the Chinese out.
In this recent interview with John Kiriakou, the real story behind the U.S. pressure campaign on Venezuela comes out. Kiriakou explains that officials and media claim it's about democracy or fighting corruption, but the real motives are oil, economic power, and blocking China's influence in the Americas. While headlines focus on political drama, the deals and threats playing out behind closed doors have almost nothing to do with helping Venezuelans. What you'll hear are the facts about global power plays and economic warfare that authorities would rather keep hidden.
Well, first, Venezuela sits on an ocean of oil. It is very, very dirty oil. It's the highest sulfur content oil in the world. And so it takes specialized refineries to refine that oil and make it pure enough for sale on the international market. Those refineries exist only in Texas. Well, they existed only in Texas until the Chinese government decided to build a refinery in the Caribbean. And so, sure, this is, maybe it's about, democracy, although I think probably not really. Sure, it's about Venezuela's foreign relations with Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, of course. But what this really is about, I think, is a far bigger picture problem that we have with under the radar Chinese expansionism. I'm wearing a suit because I was in kind of a high level meeting today in Washington. And one of the participants asked me where I thought the next big intelligence problem was going to be from. And I said, I think really it's China. I think we're underestimating the fact that the Chinese are swimming in money because they spend so much less on national defense than we do. And they use that money essentially to buy good relations with much of the rest of the world, or most of the third world. And so it hardly costs them anything to say, oh, we'll build a refinery in the Caribbean so we can process that dirty high sulfur oil and we can screw the Americans at the same time. It was the Chinese, getting back to Greece for a second, when the Greeks were at their worst economically a decade ago or so, decade and a half ago, the Chinese swooped in and they purchased the port of Piraeus, which is the biggest cargo port in all of Europe, and the port of Thessaloniki, which is the third busiest cargo port in all of the European Union. They just purchased them. Now, both of Greece's main ports are Chinese ports. They purchased the airport in Heraklion, Crete. They purchased the airport in Patras, which is Greece's third city. And they've done that all over Latin America and Africa. Oh, you need a highway? We'll build the highway. You need a port, you need a hospital, you need whatever, a new presidential palace or an airport, we'll build it. We'll own it. You can use it, but we'll build it. And so it's like everybody's indebted to the Chinese now. Well, I think that the president is doing exactly the right thing to try to keep the Chinese at least out of this hemisphere as best he can. And I'll tell you another thing. I think it's even more complicated than that. A few years ago, during the Biden administration, Kuwait executed an oil contract with China, a massive oil contract that for the very first time ever, the Chinese paid in yuan and not in dollars. That in and of itself could lead to, economic catastrophe in the United States. And so the idea was we need to pay closer attention, not to our political relationships in the Middle East necessarily, but to our economic relationships in the Middle East. And for many decades, really since the Franklin Roosevelt administration, the basis of our relationship with Saudi Arabia has been we sell them weapons and they sell us oil. And that's it. Bringing the Saudis, and by extent the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Tunisians, the Sudanese, even the Moroccans, into the Abraham Accords is a way to strengthen our relations with those countries politically, where our political relations have sort of stumbled over recent years. So whether you like Israel or not, that's a separate issue. The issue is that the president has expanded the depth of our relationship with Arab countries. If that ends up being good for Israel, well, then that's good for Israel. But actually, it's good for us. I think that's what the calculus is.
As Kiriakou breaks down, Venezuela sits on a sea of oil that only specialized refineries, mostly in Texas, can handle. But China moved in, building its own refinery in the Caribbean to bypass U.S. control and buy influence with Maduro's regime. While Americans are told this is about freedom or humanitarian aid, the real fight is over who controls resources and global markets. The U.S. scrambles to keep China out of Latin America and the Middle East, using sanctions, bounties, and behind-the-scenes pressure, while the public rarely hears what's really at stake.
While denying wars of choice. And that's very, very important here. I don't actually think that the president is going to order ground troops into Venezuela. He doesn't get anything from it. I think that we should be attuned to some sort of eventual agreement where Maduro flees, whether it's to Russia or to Cuba. Now, there was a leak a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago or so, where Maduro's private pilot said that the CIA had approached him and tried to recruit him so that when Maduro eventually fled, rather than land the plane in Havana, he would land it in Key West, and we could grab Maduro and put him on trial for narcotics trafficking. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. My guess is the president is trying to put as much pressure as possible on Maduro, political pressure on Maduro, to leave, knowing that thousands and thousands of Venezuelans who are in the diaspora would return to Venezuela to help rebuild their country. And at the same time, you keep the Chinese out. I think that's actually a good idea. So many of my friends on the left laugh at the notion that this is a peace president. But by God, look at the facts. He actually is the peace president. Is there war right now between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda? No, there's not, because he negotiated a peace. Is there war now between Cambodia and Thailand over some silly island in the middle of a river that has some ruined temple on it? No, because he negotiated a peace. Did we see nuclear launches between Pakistan and India earlier this year? Of course not, because he negotiated a peace. We tend to focus on Israel. There's not going to be peace in Israel. It's a fact of life. Thank God there's something sort of kind of a ceasefire. There's not peace, but he can easily point to 7 or 8 other places around the world that are not at war right now because he was able to negotiate a peace. So listen, whether you like the man or not, you have to give him credit for what he's done. First of all, I think the president really believed during the campaign and in the interim before he took the oath of office for the second time, I think he really believed that he could settle this conflict quickly. The reason that he couldn't is because the Russians just were not willing to offer any concessions. You can't blame Donald Trump for this. I put it on Vladimir Putin. However, the Russians have been adamant from the very beginning that they want Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Crimea. Those are all Russian-speaking provinces anyway, and the Russians have controlled those regions since the very outset of the war. So essentially, the agreement would be the Russians keep what they've taken, and the Ukrainians keep everything else. That Ukraine could join the European Union on a fast track application, but they could not join NATO. Well, listen, that's a victory for the United States because they don't have to join NATO. Australia is not in NATO. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Emirates, Japan, South Korea are not in NATO. They have what's called major non-NATO status. That's an official title, major non-NATO status. So all you have to do is just declare Ukraine to have major non-NATO status. The issue is done. It's that easy. The problem, though, besides intransigence on the part of Vladimir Putin, is that the French, the Poles, and the Germans are obsessed with continuing this fight. And as Americans, we don't get anything out of this fight, except that it empties our wallets. So it really is past time to put it to bed. Ukraine's not going to win this war. They're losing it now, even with the tens, hundreds of billions of dollars that the United States has sent over there over the past, 3 or 4 years. They're losing anyway. They don't have the manpower. Russia's a nuclear state. Just agree to the borders as are being proposed, and the thing is done. 2 years ago, I got invited with a group of 7 other people. 8 of us were invited to lunch with the Russian ambassador here in Washington, D.C. And he told us to prepare to talk at this lunch about ways in which the United States and Russia could cooperate even during a time of war. So I was the only one who was a former intelligence officer. And when it came time for my turn to speak, I said, Your Excellency, I feel very strongly that there are multiple ways in which the United States and Russia could cooperate even in a time of war. And that is counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, and counter-proliferation. I said, there's no downside to us having intelligence exchanges on these 3 issues. And then we moved on to things that, like, why are we not able to get there? And I said, look, when you arrest a black female basketball player for having a little bit of weed oil and you give her 10 years at hard labor, it's a bad look. It's just a bad look. And he said, do you know how many Russians are in American prisons right now? I'll tell you, 1,500. And I know because my people have to go visit them. And I said, I'm sure that that's true, but be that as it may, here in the United States, it's just a bad look.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything ever came out of that, but every one of the 8 of us did have ideas where we could cooperate and strengthen the relationship. Once the war is done, there's no reason why we can't go back to the way things were before the war. Yes, Europe should be buying Russian natural gas, and that's less natural gas to go to China or to go to Iran. We should be trading with Russia because, number one, sanctions don't work. They've never worked. Just ask, Raul Castro about sanctions. He'll tell you all you want to know. But sanctions don't work. Trade does work. It strengthens the U.S. economy and gives us more leverage because the relationship is pushed to a higher level. Besides the fact that Russia is an officially Christian country that we should have been trying to integrate into the West for the last 30 years.
This isn't just about Venezuela or one round of sanctions. Kiriakou shows how global powers use propaganda, secret deals, and economic threats to hold on to influence, even as ordinary people pay the price. The agendas shaping these decisions are almost never explained to the public. If you want the truth, you have to look past the headlines and question what authorities are really fighting to protect.